Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast, where we talk with early-stage entrepreneurs to understand what information they use to inform product roadmap, strategy, and market differentiation.
Today, I have with me Nick Birch from PropelUp. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here.
All right. Tell us a little bit about PropelUp.
Yeah, so PropelUp is an online learning platform. So what we help people do is find learning resources, particularly right now around coding skills. A little bit of background on this. We started this company as a tutoring service for software engineering and started to realize that the biggest value that we were providing, our biggest value our tutors were providing, was in large part general guidance on what types of resources to learn and what kinds of things to be learning. So if I want to get a job as a software developer, or I'm a marketer and I want to learn SQL databases because I need to pull data out, do analytics on it. How do I go about learning that as cheaply and efficiently as possible? So we're building a platform now to help people find those resources.
Awesome. And so maybe just a couple of quick clarifying questions on the product. So my user experience when I go to the product as maybe a first-time developer or a young developer, talk me a little bit through what that experience looks like.
Yeah. So if you're a first-time developer, you never coded before, then the platform is going to give you an overview of what does the developer ecosystem look like? What are the different options? What is the difference between a mobile developer and a web developer? What is some of the different functionalities, technologies look like? It's kind of a broad overview, and then help guide you towards, okay, well, if you think you want to go down this path, these are the type of resources you can use and those types of projects you can build to develop those skills. So in large part, what we're trying to do is enable more people to have effective and affordable access to developing coding skills and long-term digital skills in general.
Awesome. So a little bit of current status on the business. Where are you guys at? Would love to know how many users you have.
Yeah.
If you can talk a little bit about profitability, if you've raised money, team size, anything that would give a listener kind of the idea of where you're at on this journey.
So this company is about 2 years in the works and really more like 3.5. If you go back to the previous company I helped start was a coding boot camp. So it was an in-person learning experience, very immersive, classroom-based, intended to be a program to help people go from I know nothing about coding to launching them into a development career. That's a great model that works and it's effective, but we decided I wanted to create something that could help more people over a longer arc of time. Because there's limiting factors there. Like not everybody can quit their job and go back to school, either afford to, either time wise or financial wise. So about 2 years ago, we started this coding boot camp called 1150 Academy about 3.5 years ago now. And about 2 years ago, I decided to spin this company out separately. And we originally started as a tutoring service. So it's about 2 years in the works. So we started doing this tutoring thing. We actually used to work with big enterprises, helping them do tutoring initially.
Yeah. And
then decided to shift, decided that was too niche of a market, particularly for the solution that we created, and decided to pivot to individuals about a year ago. So working one-on-one, people that wanted to learn how to code, or we actually worked a lot with people that were boot camp graduates that wanted to continue that learning and wanted to work with a more senior engineer to keep that learning going. So to date, from the tutoring side, we've worked with around probably, I would say 40 people. The business is not cash flow positive. We have raised a little bit of money. I, as the founder, put in some of my own personal money. We've raised money from a small amount from one investor. We haven't done anything like a formal raise. And about 4 months ago, to kind of button up to where we're at now, about 4 or 5 months ago, we decided to try to make this transition to more of a platform approach. Because we started in delivering this tutoring service, we started to notice a pattern that we believed we could create a productized version of that to repeat, to be able to do that on a larger scale. And so we're still developing that, and we are going to be launching that live actually here in just a matter of days. So we will launch that. We will start beta testing it here in about the middle of January, and we'll launch publicly at the end of January. So actually, we're getting ready to bring on users. So far, tractions for that, we started pre-signing up people. So we're doing the whole, set up the web page,
right.
Act like it's a platform already, and have the sign up button. And so we've had, as of today, we have about 75 signups all through word of mouth. So no promotion, no paid promotion, just sharing a little bit through social, email, reach out to some groups.
Didn't you just take a tour around the country?
I did.
Didn't you just drive around the country? Yeah. And that was related to PropelUp, right?
It was.
Yeah.
It was. So that was interesting because it was the purpose of that trip was to, in large part, broaden my perspective. One, about tech in general and tech communities. Since I grew up here in the Midwest, I graduated college in 2014, moved to Indianapolis, and have only really operated here in Indianapolis. And wanted to broaden my perspective on what other tech communities are like. Get on the ground there and talk to other entrepreneurs, talk to people that are, in Indianapolis, people talk about the community connectors, talk about people like Matt Hunkler. I wanted to go meet the Matt Hunklers and other communities and have them tell me about their communities. And then also learn about education. Because I'm very passionate about education and this idea of bringing, increasing access and affordability to particularly relevant skills of today and the future to more people. And that's why we're building this direction with PropelUp. And so I wanted to talk to people that are doing interesting things within education technology, within this space of tech skills. So I visited companies like, for example, Coursera, and talked to some of their engineers about what they're doing, what they've seen in this movement of MOOCs, the massive online open courseware.
Yeah.
What are they seeing and where are they trying to go? As much as they would share with me, obviously. Which is surprising how much these companies will share with you if you just ask. What are their challenges? Where are they going? Where do they see as the big opportunities? If you actually ask their team members, a lot of times they'll tell you. So that was an experience.
So I saw the map online a couple of times. Just real quick for people who aren't familiar with the trip, just give a quick rundown of like the cities that you hit along the way.
So it was 12 weeks, and the idea was to spend about a week in every city. And so I went Chicago, stopped in St. Louis for just a couple of days. So Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, Denver and Boulder, I split a week there. Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Austin. I had a little mishap in there because this is when the hurricane hit Florida, the second big one. So I ended up staying a little bit. I actually went to Houston, visit some friends there, and made a little detour. So Atlanta, I was supposed to go to Raleigh, but because of the hurricane, ended up skipping that. Then DC, New York, and Boston. So all over the place. Big, giant circle.
Yeah, big, giant circle. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And are you staying in Indianapolis, or are you now relocating to Boston?
So that was actually an interesting thing. People asked that, especially before I left. They said, "Are you going to end up back here in Indy?" And I said, 90. My canned response was 95% chance I end up back in Indy. I love the people here. I love the momentum behind the community. I particularly, as a bootstrapped entrepreneur, I particularly like the cost of living.
Yes.
I've actually written a little bit about how I've been able to scrape by and make hardly any money, but focus a lot of my time on the companies rather than trying to have a side gig. I've had side gigs. I've done things like driven for Uber and done housework for people. I mean, I've done all kinds of stuff to make ends meet. But I left open the possibility that, hey, maybe I'll decide that there's a tech community that I want to go move to. I pretty much knew going into it, it wasn't going to be San Francisco or Seattle or one of the really, really big ones. But to be honest, I was really intrigued with the communities in particularly Boulder, Austin, and Boston. Austin and Boston, which is kind of hard to say together, but those two particularly because they have pretty robust ed tech communities. There's an accelerator in a space in Boston called Learn Launch. That was really interesting. I'm actually going out there later this month for a conference they're hosting. So still 95% chance I stay here in Indy. And if I do stay here in Indy, it's for all those reasons I mentioned. And also because I want to be part of helping Indy get to that next level as a community. If I decide to stay here, which I'm still, again, 95% committed to staying here, it would be because I, one, believe that, which I do, that Indy can get to the next level. I've only been in this community for about 4 years now, so I can't speak to the time before I got here after the exact target exit, so I can only speak to what I've really experienced now, and then what I hear from people from their experience before that. We've got a lot of momentum, but we got a long way to go if we want to compete with communities like, particularly I think the Austins, Atlantas, Boulders are really good cities for us as Indianapolis to aspire to compete with as tech communities that are looking at measures of capital raised and jobs created and exits over the next several years.
Awesome. Thanks for the detour there. So let's go back to PropelUp.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about competition. So when you think about PropelUp, who do you think of? And you can either name companies or just talk in general about types of platforms. But who do you think about as competition in the space?
So this has been interesting because competition for us, as the business model has changed, so has how we've thought about, I'm going to say broadly, the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because I think of the ecosystem as comprised of both competitors and potential partners. And some companies can be potentially both,
right?
Depending on how you approach them or which way the technology goes. And so, for example, when we were doing this tutoring, and we still are, we're still doing the tutoring component. Actually, I had somebody sign up today, and I've got another session to do a first session with someone this afternoon. So we're still continuing to do that. But
quick side note. Do you think you'll continue to do that, or do you think you'll set that aside at some point?
I think if I had to look into my crystal ball, I would say eventually we'll set that aside.
Okay.
And the reason being, two big reasons there. This is just my thinking today. The two big reasons I think eventually we set that aside are, one, it's a low margin service model. Two-sided marketplace, incredibly challenging to scale, as I've experienced over the last 6 months. And to be honest, it was when we originally started doing it. I say doing it when we started this. I really did that for two reasons. One, a service model is the fastest way to revenue for the least amount of cost. And two, it's the fastest, not just the fastest way to revenue, but it's the fastest way to validation with customers. Can you provide value of some kind to the customers? And I feel like that's what we've been able to do thus far, is to validate that, particularly the big key value that we're providing. One of the key big values we're providing to our current customers is just guidance. Where to go, what to learn next, what kind of projects to build. Excuse me. And you can't ever automate all of that. But this is now coming back to like the ecosystem part. I think long-term strategically, it probably makes more sense for us to build this build the platform that we're building now to be a tool that enables these existing communities of mentor, whatever you want to refer to them as. We call them gurus. You can call them mentors, professors, teachers. Think of any kind of educational system or program, coding boot camps, colleges, informal meetup groups. There are mentors in those communities. Replicating this mentor, whatever you want to, and I do try to differentiate, because I don't try to refer to what we do currently as a tutoring as mentoring. I think true mentoring as more career guidance. I look at more what we do as more directed learning. So we work with people less on like how to navigate their career and more on how do you continue to develop your JavaScript skills or front-end web development skills so that somebody will employ you. So you can be technically competent to get a job. So from a competitive standpoint, that's kind of changed over time, where those platforms, there's already platforms that are pretty big that do this on-demand tutoring for developers. There's one out of San Francisco called Code Mentor. It's been around a couple years now. There's another one that's a little bit older called AirPair. There's a couple other smaller ones that aren't as prominent. Those have been around for a while. And there's gigantic, just general tutoring platforms as well. There's a couple big players in that space, and more so they're focused down on like the high school and college level. I think even tutors.com is a big company. I can't remember exactly. They weren't necessarily a direct comparison. I didn't look at them a lot. But so now as I think more long-term, I look at companies like a Code Mentor or others as more likely a partner that could be a better enablement to what we do very, very well with this platform. What I think is really compelling about the platform, when I think about from a competition standpoint, what I think is unique about our approach, and that actually limits the number of customers we have, is that we don't actually intend to create educational content. You think of Lynda or Pluralsight or Udemy or Udacity, you sign up for those platforms to use their learning content that's created by either their teams internally or by these independent instructors and independent contractors. I believe that we're moving more and more every day towards a reality where learning content is a true commodity, that it is being improved by the community. It's going to be improved and driven by this global community, especially with technology and digital skills. Not just digital skills like coding, but data science. As blockchain gets more and more relevant, marketing skills, particularly around digital marketing, finance skills, essentially any kind of skill you can learn online, there's a piece of content out there for it. What doesn't exist right now is, and the way I refer to this, there's this giant ocean of information out there. And things like Google help us kind of find resources in the right categories. If you Google learn to code for free, you'll get hundreds of resources. They're all of range of quality, but a lot of them are very good quality. But there's nothing that exists that can say, as a user, as a learner, that you can go to and say, I want to go learn how to do this. And it can point you to the right resources that are going to be a combination of the most effective and the most effective from a learning experience and the most cost effective. So I look now as more like the content creators, whether they be independent or the Udemys, Udacities, Pluralsights. I look at them now less as competitors, again, but they could definitely be perceived as competitors.
Right.
I look at them long-term as more of collaborators and partners. And so one of the interesting things kind of along that lines was around the content piece. I saw, when I was in Boston, I saw Eric Schmidt speak, who's the chairman, longtime CEO of Google,
right?
Now Alphabet. And I think he's just stepping down as a chairman, but until a couple weeks ago, he's chairman. So I saw him speak out in Boston. He actually talked about workforce development, education. It was an award ceremony for some education programs from MIT. And one of the comments he made that I didn't realize this was the case, he said that 20% of the content on YouTube is educational related, which seemed really high to me. I wouldn't expect that it'd be. Now, you could probably argue.
That's funny. It seems low to me.
Well, it's interesting because I wonder, how do you categorize things as truly educational? Like, if I make a video about.
No, when your car explodes, you learn not to put that in the gas tank. I think that's fair, right? Like that's educational.
Yeah, or those famous YouTube guys are like, watch us make fun of ourselves at the mall by doing something stupid. It's like, it's kind of educational.
Yeah. That's interesting. All right. There was a point to that before I jumped in. Sorry.
Yeah. So you think about all the content that's out there, not just YouTube, but again, all these platforms that are competing to create and market themselves as the best content. What I try to, one of the things that investors, as I've learned from my experience talking to investors and just learning from other entrepreneurs, they can be helpful to make kind of metaphorical comparisons to other types of companies. So I look at, when I describe kind of what we're doing, I think of it as like, I use two metaphors. One, either that we're kind of building like a Google Maps for learning. So you want to get from point A to point B, you get all these different options, you have different pacings for how to get there. Now, if you go into Google Maps, it's real time, like Meridian Street just closed down. It'll route you around Google Maps. It's in real time as opposed to think of like MapQuest, where it didn't, or even before that, you had Paper Map. You had no idea where to go. So we want to build real time, dynamic learning curriculum that leverages and updates itself using the best, most relevant learning content to help people learn skills. And the other one is from a model standpoint, kind of business structure, would be kind of Netflix. Netflix does now create a lot of its own original content, but they started by just essentially aggregating all these shows and movies and licensing those from the original creators.
So living in that landscape, right, of competition and partners, and right, so it's a little blended. When you look forward to 2 years from now, what are you looking at in the industry that you're in, either as a trend or you're looking at as maybe a gap in the market that you don't see competitors going into, that you feel like you guys are positioned over the next couple of years to take advantage of?
Yeah.
And how did you And how did you come to that conclusion?
So one of the big trends in education in general that I'm seeing is more from outside of the world of education. It's being driven by forces outside of the community of educators, is the cost of education. There's a big conversation that seems to be, and it seems like this is a conversation that's not necessarily anything new, but people are becoming more and more attuned to the rising cost or the rising amount of student loan debt. So our colleges are getting more expensive. So, for example, these are not going to be exact numbers, but since 1980, I believe the cost of tuition and fees at four universities has gone up like eightfold. I believe that would not be.
That's based on what year? What was the starting
year? 1980.
1980. Okay.
So in the last 40 years, the cost of tuition and fees at universities has gone up about eightfold. At the same time, real wages have increased. Like they've only doubled. So there's all these really scary graphs of real wages basically staying relatively flat for the last couple of decades while costs of education are skyrocketing. 2 to 3 times the rate of inflation. The cost of tuition and fees are increasing. So there's a decreased perception of value, particularly around higher education. You look at other numbers, not just around higher education, but K through 12, and we spend almost twice as much per capita of any other country, and we're 30th in math. I don't have I can't remember all this off the top of my head, but we're 30th in math and 50th in science. We're not getting great returns subjectively on our
for what you're spending.
Yeah, on our investments in education.
Yeah.
So I think there already is a big push to education becoming more nimble, more cost efficient. I think this is in large part where like the coding boot camps have come from. There's this sense of, I think it's a couple factors. The original reason that Scott Jones, myself, Terrence Kunstek, Matt McIntyre originally started this coding boot camp several years ago, not knowing that these coding boot camps were even a thing. They had been around for a little bit, but not. We kind of were just right at the start of the big wave of them a couple of years ago when we started this. We didn't know coding boot camps were a thing. All we did was, Scott, who's a serial entrepreneur, tons of tech companies over the last 30 years, both him working on them and investing in them. So anecdotally, he's had a lot of experience in challenges hiring developers, engineers. And then also at the same time, there was some data that TechPoint, organization here in Indianapolis, put out around the talent gap, just here in Indiana on it, looking at how many people were graduating with engineering, computer science related degrees per year versus what's the job demand.
Right.
And I think the numbers that this was like 2013 data. It's like we're graduating about 800. And the job demand was, I think, around 4,000. So it wasn't a small gap. It was like holy cow, there's a big hole there. So at that point, we just decided, and I had just graduated from Rose-Hulman, one of the top engineering programs in the country. And I didn't even hesitate to say, to think that education, we need programs to enable people to continuously learn throughout their lives. We have to move away from this idea of you go to high school, you go to college, and you're done learning. You graduate, and that's it. Now you're ready for a job. I think people, I'm now 26, I think a lot of people knock on millennials. And this entitlement, why do they assume they should be delivered anything? I think part of that is that, in large part, we go to college because that's supposed to get you a job. I mean, the reason I went to Rose-Hulman over anywhere else, over University of Illinois or Purdue or other kind of great big brand name engineering schools, was the job placement rate for Rose. Every year, 95, even during the recession, we had greater than 95% job placement. That was why I went and I started there in 2010. So still not right. Kind of come back a little bit. I went to college. I went to Rose-Hulman specifically because I pretty much knew I was guaranteed to have a job. And so I think a lot of people are going into college with the assumption that that's going to be enough to get them in whatever degree they come out with, that's going to be enough to get them a job. And so we need to do a better job. I'm just saying this generally. I'm not pointing necessarily at anybody. I think there's a lot of people that need to be part of this. We need to do a better job of, one, convincing people of all ages that you're going to have to continuously learn new skills. Those skills are going to be changing. They're moving a lot from even technical skills to more higher level problem solving skills to be more creative. I think one of the byproducts that people aren't even thinking about with this big push in Indiana for computer science in K through 12 is just the general problem solving that things like computer science force you to do. For example, when people ask, Nick, what did you get out of your engineering degree at Rose-Hulman? My response is, they taught me how to be a problem solver. That's what an engineer is at the end of the day. You use a set of tools, whether that's learning JavaScript or React, or if you're a marketer, it's learning how to create Facebook campaigns. It's all that you're working backwards from some problem you're trying to solve. And the skill set, your tool set you use is important in that. But understanding that process and that problem solving creative nature is something that I think we need to develop more. We need to do it more with younger individuals. Even more people went to engineering school, for example, and I'm probably biased because I'm an engineering graduate. I think if more people went to an engineering school and came out and went into roles of sales or finance or marketing, I think we would be, in large part, better off. Because I think what we need more of in the future is people that are creative problem solvers. Back to your original question of what are the big trends, I think the big thing is, I started that with saying, a lot of it's around the cost.
Yeah.
And those all kind of play together because now if you graduate from an expensive university, you don't really usually have the funds to invest in that continuous learning.
Right. Or maybe even the appetite. Right?
Yeah.
Or you spent 4 years full time.
Yeah.
You're not really in the mindset of, let's go back to school.
We've even seen with the tutoring we've done, we've worked with a lot of graduates of both here in Indianapolis, the two main boot camps, 1150 and Iron Yard. And a lot of the students that we talk with that don't end up using PropelUp to find a tutor, that even though they want to, is always cost. It's 100% of the time, it's always cost. It's not that they don't think it's valuable. It's that I just spent thousands of dollars on my education, and my perception was that my skills were going to be enough to get me into a job. And that happens for a lot of people, but for those that don't, we need solutions. We need resources that can be available to those individuals, so we don't get them 80% of the way there and then leave them to wander off as zombies trying to figure out where they're going to go next.
All right. So maybe a couple of quick rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
What resources do you use, websites, tools, whatever, to kind of stay current on what's new in your market? Whether that's new tools that are launching, new companies, where do you go?
Yeah. I try to focus on following the people and organizations that it is their number one job to do that. So particularly like investors in that space. So every space is going to have funds or groups that are specifically focused on that. You get some that are broad. Locally you think like an Allos or an M25. They're focused more broadly. And yes, they're focused on technology, and Allos is focused a lot on SaaS and B2B. But particularly some of the bigger funds. For example, in education, there's several education-related funds. I sign up for their newsletters. I follow their partners on Twitter and see what they're sharing. There's an online publication for education called EdSurge. So I follow them and subscribe to some of their blogs, particularly around higher education. And what's interesting is even for example, like the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is a publication specifically for colleges. My mom actually works at a university, and she every once in a while she actually forwards me something that she finds on there. She's like, "You might find this interesting for what you're doing."
Nice.
She's been on the staff side of a college her entire career, 35 years now. So it's always interesting to hear her perspective. She's at a small liberal arts school in Illinois and has been there her entire career. So it's always interesting to hear her perspective and how college has changed, that college specifically. So even my mom I actually use as a resource of, what are you seeing? What is the administration talking about?
Yeah, when you get all that information, do you have any particular tools you use or techniques you use to organize it, track it over time, anything like that? Beautiful mind type stuff, whiteboard somewhere, news clipping, string?
I do try to keep particularly if I find articles, I try to bookmark them so that I can come back later if I want to pull out ideas. A lot of it, to be honest, I don't have a formal system. I try to let it just synthesize in my head. Part of my rationale there, and I don't know how valid this is, but part of my rationale there is every single, if you read an article or a book or what, and I read all of them. I read blogs, I read books about education, I read books and things written by cognitive psychologists that are not very fun to read, but really interesting because of the insights, because they're approaching learning and memory from a very scientific standpoint versus, a policy or standpoint or what is typically what you'll find on like an EdSurge or Chronicle higher education. They're almost always talking about policy and more related things. One of the things that I've tried to consciously do more over the last several months, particularly, and this wasn't the case early on, particularly going back to like the 1150 days. My role with the 1150, this coding boot camp initially, was such that, especially for the first several months, I basically ran everything but teaching the classes. So all the operations, all the coordination we fed the students. It was tons. I didn't really get a big chance to really think, what is it they were actually doing? It was just execute.
Yeah.
And best thing that I found that the more I actually set aside time to just walk and think or do nothing, like not even read, just kind of think.
Like be behind the wheel of a car and drive for 12 weeks?
Yeah. I mean, that drive was, I actually love driving. So I had 2 drives on that trip that were longer than 22 hours. So from Boulder to Seattle was a full day, a 24-hour drive straight through. That was not fun. Do not recommend that.
Wow.
And then San Diego to Austin was about 22 hours. I just slept for a few hours. Slept for a few hours in that one. And I learned my lesson after the first one. Just the time to think. It'll be interesting because if I had 20 some hours in the car, I would listen to podcasts for part of it. I would listen to an audiobook for part of it. And then part of it, I would just sit there in silence and let my mind wander. And it would wander and it would think. In large part, as I kind of reflect now, I'm thinking about that ecosystem. I'm thinking about how do we plan it? What's missing? What am I? And that's where that synthesis starts to kind of come together. Is all of this stuff that I've read and these people I've talked to, the customers I've talked to, and what's been interesting. We've had customers that have been individuals. We've had customers that have been small companies. We've had customers that have been big companies. So I've been able to take a little bit from all of those different stakeholders. We haven't had any customers directly that are educational providers. We want those to be customers. We're talking to several groups right now that are kind of pseudo coding boot camps that instead of creating their own curriculum program want to explore using what we're building so they don't have to make that investment. They can essentially outsource that cost, which lowers their cost, which lowers their price to students. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. And what's really interesting is we're trying to set this up so that educational services can actually create recurring revenue for their customers, for their students. So now think about a college having recurring revenue, Rose-Hulman or IUPUI or Ball State.
Well, after you leave.
Yeah. What if they could not? What if they could, one, provide you value that goes beyond just an alumni network or continuing education classes or really expensive master's programs? What if they could provide you on a recurring revenue model? These are the things that my brain started thinking about on these trips. Thinking about all these different stakeholders. What are their current struggles? What do they need? What do each of these stakeholders, both companies, educators, education providers, kind of the colleges, the high schools, boot camps, what are they going to need to stay relevant and compete in the future? And what is it that we can be uniquely capable of providing? And also, what's going to be interesting? I mean, to be completely honest, the tutoring thing was not that interesting to me. It wasn't interesting. It's interesting, but I don't think it would be that much fun to scale a tutoring platform. So I just think even myself personally, what am I going to find fun? Same thing with 1150. I had an opportunity to stay around there and try to help them scale that program.
Right.
And they are scaling. It's taken a little while to figure out how to scale, but they should be actually launching hopefully 3 or 4 more locations around the state this year. I just decided it wouldn't be, I could have more fun doing something else. So it's kind of, I try to find a mix of what's going to be fun to me, what's going to be the biggest impact, and what is the thing that no one else is really doing or doing that well, that everyone seems to be missing. And I believe I think we're on the path to achieving that.
If people want to learn more about PropelUp, or if they want to follow you, where can they find you?
PropelUp is propelup.io. On Twitter, they're at PropelUp. My Twitter is at Birch Startups. So Birch, B-I-R-C-H, not B-U-R-C-H. So B-I-R-C-H Startups. And if anybody has questions for me about entrepreneurship or startups, I like to share and be very, hopefully if someone's listened to this whole thing, I'm very transparent. I like to be very transparent. You can send me an email. I'm nick@propelup.io. Happy to answer questions or provide guidance if it can be helpful to someone.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you're thinking of launching a SaaS product, Startup Competitors can provide data on your closest competitors, survey potential users, or provide other product validation services. Learn more at startupcompetitors.com.